First of all, I'd like to say welcome to the Hall of MAAT. T. Owens Moore, resident of DeKalb County here in Georgia, colleague of my brother Pierre Carson, who houses a Hall of MAAT here. Trying to put it on the map to bring information to the people, information to our community that certainly have an impact on where we need to go to be progressive in our society. But we also have to look at those dynamic issues that start to keep us back and do not allow us to proceed on and move on. I titled the topic of discussion today, Ethnic Weapons, Biological Warfare on the Human, and I spelled human, H-U-E-M, because we're talking about colored people, not as in Negroes, but just people who got melanin. When you think about it, it's really just all types of colored people. That's why I say human, because this really is not isolated to just African people. The United States government, which has been or has been the most powerful nation on the planet, has done things that have been considered to be diabolical. And I put this first little transparency up for a warning because you will be worried after this presentation because of the information that I'm sharing. Some of you may already know about some of it, and I would certainly love to leave the end of this discussion up for open dialogue rather than being a lecture and you hearing something from me. Many of you may have reports and understandings and issues that can share for the community. Yeah, I suggest you leave now, and if your mind cannot comprehend the reality of how a diabolical mind really can function. I mean, we've just come from 9/11 and everybody's all patriotic now, and it's like, oh, America can never be diabolical. America can never, do bad things to its people. That can't exist. America is, we're all patriots. But the reality is, that term diabolical does start to relate to our relationship that we have had with Europeans. Diabolic means of the devil or devils. And you start thinking about that and the issues and what Europeans have done to African people worldwide, you start to understand where the Nation of Islam had come up with this thing about the European being a devil. It wasn't so much talking about people being a devil with what horns on their head. No, their behavior, their characteristics. Very wicked or cruel, fiendish, devilish, demonical. Anybody would want to think of how can we create some chemical substance, some biological entity to destroy another person? That's diabolical. African people don't think like that. People outside of the Western tradition don't think like that. But when you start talking about control, domination, people who become megalomaniacs, wanting to control the world and resources, you will do whatever is necessary to control the environment. If we talk about the world's population and the masses or the wealth, the most wealth that's controlled in the world is by a little bit of people, don't you think that little bit of people would do whatever is necessary to keep their hands in the pot? So when we talk about this thing diabolical, we're talking about a nature, a mindset in a people that will really do something to hinder a whole group of people. So that's where we're going to go in terms of our discussion today. There are several documents that really do state the Europeans' involvement in chemical and biological warfare. There are several documents like covert action. I just want to read a few pieces from these documents. What's up, scholars? Some veterans that are coming right in here to the audience, and they would certainly have some impact on what the Army and military has done, so they need to be sitting right up front here. Chemical biological warfare, medical experiments, and population control. Could AIDS be the result of accidental or purposeful biological intervention by the U.S. government against third world nations, North American gay men, or intravenous IV drug users? A look at past and present practices suggests ample precedents. U.S. history is replete with efforts to inflict disease and death on the third world people, both inside and outside U.S. borders, through chemical and biological warfare, medical experiments, and population control. And despite an alleged ban on development of chemical biological warfare weapons since 1969, there is also ample evidence that such programs have continued incorporating the latest techniques in genetic engineering. In addition, the U.S. military has never shown any compunctions about testing chemical biological warfare techniques on the general population in this country. For example, following are some highlights. When I say CBW, I'm speaking of chemical biological warfare, so I can make it shorter. Native American nations. The first recorded instance of U.S. biological warfare was in 1763, when white colonial settlers gave smallpox-infected blankets to Native Americans who sought friendly relations. Many died as a result. This tactic was repeated during the Trail of Tears of the 1800s. So a people extending their hand, opening their home, and these people are going to give them smallpox and blankets to kill them off so what they can then get their land. A mentality, diabolical. Europeans come in and meet the Native Americans. They say, hey, this is a nice place, you know. So the Native Americans share some spaces with them and give it to them, and Native Americans come back to this place next year, there's a fence up. So what's the fence for? They don't think like that. So there's a whole different mindset we're dealing with here, and if we don't go back to the roots of these issues, we'll never understand the nature of these individuals. Germany and Japan. In World War I, the U.S. joined all the warring parties in using poisonous gases, although to an even greater degree than the others. In World War II, U.S. contingency plans for massive use of CBW against Germany and Japan were avoided by a matter of weeks due to the defeat of the Axis powers. However, there is strong evidence of U.S. use of anti-crop warfare against its two major adversaries. Move on. North Korea. In the Korean War, the first modern U.S. counterinsurgency war, no such limitations were employed. According to an international investigating commission, the U.S. used an array of germ weapons against the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea. Feathers infected with anthrax, lice, fleas, and mosquitoes, dosed with plague and yellow fever, diseased rodents, and various implements contaminated with deadly microbes, toilet paper, envelopes, and the ink and fountain pens. Indochina. In the war against Indochina, U.S. CBW reached its zenith. It was the most massive chemical warfare in history. Seeking to destroy crops, supporting the popular guerrilla movements, the U.S. early sprayed 55 million kilograms of defoliants, primarily Agent Orange, on the nations of Indochina. As a result, the ecology of massive areas was destroyed. Millions of people were poisoned, many developed cancer, some died, and the next generation suffered horrendous rates of birth defects. Cuba. Since its 1959 revolution, Cuba has been a prime target of U.S. military, economic, and political attacks. In the 1960s, an anti-crop warfare program was carried out. In 1971, the CIA infected Cuban pigs with African swine fever, a deadly disease. Cuban authorities had to slaughter the entire pig population to stop the disease spread. Let's bring this on home to America. 1950s. The U.S. Navy spread a cloud of bacteria over San Francisco. The Navy claimed the bacteria used in the simulated attack were harmless. But many residents came down with pneumonia-like symptoms, and one died. 1952 and 53, clouds of zinc cadmium sulfide were sprayed over Winnipeg, Manitoba, St. Louis, Missouri, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Fort Wayne, Indiana, and Maryland. Despite claims of harmlessness, a military report noted respiratory problems. 1955, the Tampa Bay area of Florida experienced a sharp rise in whooping cough cases, including 12 deaths following the CIA bio-war test, whose details are still secret, involving bacteria withdrawn from the Army CBW Center. 56 to 58, in the poor black communities of Savannah, Georgia, and Avon Park, Florida, the Army carried out field tests with mosquitoes that may have been infected with yellow fever. And we'll come back to the yellow fever. The insects were released into residential areas from ground level and dropped from planes and helicopters. Many people were swarmed by mosquitoes and then developed unknown fevers. Some died. After each test, Army agents posing as public health officials photographed the tested victims and then disappeared from town. June 7th to 10th, 1966, the Army's Special Operations Division dispensed a bacillus throughout the New York City subway system. The Army's reports on the experiment noted the existence of subways in the Soviet Union, Europe, and South America. 68-69, the CIA experimented with the possibility of poisoning drinking water systems by injecting a chemical substance into the water supply of the FDA, that's Federal Food and Drug Administration building in Washington, D.C. And then one last one. One highly suspicious incident that could bear scrutiny as a possible CBW test is the 1978 mass suicide of 900 black North Americans in Jonestown, Guyana. So we haven't even mentioned the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, have we? 40 years studying syphilis in men, and then if you talk about men, the whole African family being infected, and you're not treating these people. 40 years. So if you think about that, they had to find some information about that. You don't just do studies and not find anything that's going on with individuals. And what I found very interesting is that there was an article called Public Health Then and Now, the Tuskegee Syphilis Study, 1932 to 1972. Implications for HIV education and AIDS risk education programs in the black community. So it's talking about how people have been very hesitant to go with the government for a test and help when you have for 40 years done something diabolical. But the article makes no reference to the fact that syphilis and AIDS could be connected. I have another article that says the syphilis epidemic and its relation to AIDS, meaning that for all those years they were studying syphilis and how it can maybe be disseminated in the community. Does that then set the precedent of, okay, now it's maybe time to release a substance that can shut down people's immune systems? Something called AIDS? For a substance like that just to pop up in the middle of Africa and people not to question that? So this whole Tuskegee experiment may have been just a precedent for what was to come. Because we always have to look at how diabolical minds work, as we even did with September 11th, 2001. Did they do that to set the stage for other things that were to come? And all these things I'm reading, and I keep mentioning the CIA. In the past, when you had Reagan that was the president, it wasn't nothing about Reagan. It was about putting the CIA in the White House. And who was CIA? George Bush. And you come up to this very day. Who's now still in the White House? The Bushes. Information is just being squashed, and we're not really paying attention to things that are happening and occurring around us. So when you start talking about when people do start to ask questions, when people do start to wake up, the powers that be must do whatever they can, and if it means chemical, biological warfare on their own people, it will be done. Okay. There were two things about this past history that I found very revealing, and one was that there are ethnic weapons, things that primarily can affect African people. Thank you. This is an article from People's Daily World called Using CBW at Home and Abroad. It says the entire U.S. chemical and biological warfare program seems more designed for use in the third world than on the plains of Europe. Chemicals will find their role primarily as weapons of desperation by faltering third world regimes against domestic insurgents or foreign invaders. Charles Pillar and Keith Yamato say in their book Gene Wars, and they go on to talk about the bulk of the microorganisms studied and stockpiled include diseases which typically infest less developed areas of the world, including yellow fever, dengue, as D-E-N-G-U-E, dengue fever, Argentinian hemorrhagic fever, Rift Valley fever, plus several types of encephalitis. It says also California Valley fever. This latter disease has been examined as a possible ethnic weapon, a disease which adversely affects certain genotypes. Asians and African Americans are particularly susceptible to valley fever. So keep in mind valley fever. I'm going to come back to that. Another one that has been very, not instrumental, but they've utilized against us. Something called Asperillus fumigatus. I'll read this for you. In November 1970, Carl Larsson, chairman of the Department of Genetics at Lund University in Sweden, published an article entitled Ethnic Weapons in Military Review, a professional journal for the U.S. Army. The article caused an uproar in biochemistry circles and set researchers looking at programs Larsson had let out of the bag. After chronicling differences among human populations, because remember now today they keep saying we're all the same, you know, can't we all just get along? There's no difference between us. But they've always known we've been different. They've studied that we've been different, and that's how they've utilized things against us. It says, Larson concluded that innate differences in vulnerability to chemical agents between different populations have led to the possible development of ethnic weapons. The Army was well aware of differences in the way that certain populations respond to biological agents. Under contract from the U.S. Navy, the University of California's Naval Bioscience Lab in Alameda, California, carried out extensive tests on a fungus endemic to California's Central Valley. The technical name is coccidiomycosis. We'll just call it valley fever, okay? Carried out extensive tests on this fungus, and the disease spread by wind-blown spores attacks the lungs, can spread into other organs and bones. In this second stage of the disease, it is extremely dangerous, with upwards of 50% fatalities. What the University of California discovered was that Asians and African Americans were extremely susceptible to valley fever. Whites were least affected. A study of Kern County General Hospital from 1949 to 76 showed that while African Americans made up only 5% of the population, they represented 59% of the valley fever cases. Moreover, their mortality rate was far higher. The Army had been well aware of this for some time and had even field tested a biological agent directed at African Americans. Congressional hearings in '77 revealed that the Department of Defense had contaminated shoes and naval stores with fungus called Asperilla fumigatus because it closely resembled valley fever. So now we have a connection between two particular types of agents that affect primarily African Americans, and now we're going to get into some of the maybe more biological aspects of how they do it. The target was unwitting African American civilians employed as dock workers and warehouse men at a naval depot in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. Since Negroes are more susceptible to valley fever than are whites, a Department of Defense official told Congress this fungus disease was simulated by using Asperilla fumigatus. The spores apparently successfully spread themselves to warehouses, trucks, elevators, and 3 Navy ships. While this fungus is not as dangerous as valley fever, it does cause a lung disease called aspergillosis. Here we say aspergillin, in biochemistry terms, is a black pigment occurring in the spores of the common bread mold. And you know that's where penicillin comes. So you see, you leave bread out for a while and you don't take care of things, mold develops. So this is what we're talking about. Something like that can be used, then can be spread, and then people can contract. It says, an antibacterial substance obtained from the molds, A. flavus and A. fumigatus, that works effectively against a wide variety of bacteria. So now you have this thing in biochemistry which can be utilized now for so-called assistance and help. However, aspergillosis, which we just talked about, a disease condition caused by an imperfect fungus of the genus Aspergillus,